This is Rachel Himsel with Gutsy Productions, and I am so excited to be here with Veronica Pejril today. Um, Democratic nominee for State Senate District 24. She has a lot of other titles, including the president of Princeton's LGBTQ plus Alumni Association and teaches at DePaul University. I'm going to let you talk more about your many, 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 many titles that you hold and the one that you're trying to win this year. But thank you for joining me today, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've worn a lot of hats over the many times that I've been around the sun here, and as you mentioned, I have some roles with QPA Queer Princeton alumni,
Yeah.
but some other nonprofit organizations that really sort of speak to the values that I hold dearly to myself. I serve on the board of directors with Indiana Youth Group, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that works to um, uh, improve outcomes for queer Hoosier youth who are and particularly those who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, have challenging family environments, and Indiana Youth Group started in Indianapolis, but we're expanding across the state right now. I serve as treasurer for that organization. Another organization that I work with locally here is Putnam County Recovery Coalition. Uh, I lost my oldest sister to overdose back in 2017,
Oh, I'm so
and
sorry.
thank you. It was obviously a really challenging time for our family to lose my oldest sister, but I saw the struggles she went through with respect to trying to navigate recovery, and um, and eventually succumbing to addiction. It's a real struggle for so many folks across the country, and particularly here in Indiana. So I'm president of Putnam County Recovery Coalition. We do the work to help educate the community, as well as we provide recovery services. We are the only non-church based um, uh, um, organization providing recovery services here in Putnam County, Indiana. And we also distribute Narcan in more accessible places throughout the county, so that more folks have access to this life-saving tool.
That's really important work. Thank you so much for that.
Hmm.
And I wasn't aware of that, and that I'm sure that drives you towards the race that you're in now, which I want to get to in a minute. You're running for Indiana State Senate District 24, right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
you're up near in Greencastle, okay, which is my old stomping grounds where I went to college, and had a blast, and also created some change. And one thing you may not know also that we have in common is I can't remember if I wrote you or not, but said but I actually was one of the founding members of United DePauw,
Oh,
which,
fantastic.
yeah, which is it still around? That's my question. Is it still
It
there?
is not still around.
Okay.
There is an LGBTQ collective, but they do not go by the name United DePauw.
Okay.
The pandemic didn't help,
Yeah.
but that organization's name actually got sidelined prior to the
But
pandemic
it
as
still
well.
exists, and and there wasn't
There's
anything for
definitely
students
community
then,
and
and
and,
there
and
just wasn't
opportunities.
anything, and it was such a hard time, and I think that's where you and I, see that it's for especially for youth, I'd say middle school, it's high school, it's college, and those coming out years. So if you wouldn't mind, since you're the first openly transgender person to be elected to office in the state of Indiana, correct?
That's
Um,
correct, and unfortunately, the only one so far. So,
wow.
in terms of what, part of my advocacy work is to do whatever work I can to make sure that I'm not the last.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, I'm running for state house this year. Um, goodness knows that this isn't unique to Indiana, but certainly within the Indiana State House, there have been laws that have been passed and bills that have been raised and died in committee that have been incredibly impactful in a negative way against our queer Hoosier neighbors, and it's really troubling to see the leaders of our state not telling or telling a significant portion of our community that numbers somewhere close to 7% of the population that they don't belong here, and you can't fully participate in civic life in ways that you might have done so for decades. There are civil rights that were hard fought and won nearly a decade ago, which are still under threat in our state house. There are civil rights that we have enjoyed for decades, which still remain under threat in the state house with
Yeah.
respect to folks being able to, fully um, um, get documents changed over, for example, with respect to birth certificates for folks who are gender expansive
Mhm.
in their lives. So it's we're seeing this assault come both in the Indiana State House but across the country as well. And I think that part of
Mhm.
it is as a response to a public that is largely far more accepting um, of marriage equality than it
Mhm.
was maybe 15 or 20 years ago. So these folks need to find, especially the lobbyist groups that like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a misnomer because they're working against the freedom of so many of us. They need to maintain their own political viability. They've lost the marriage equality battle, and so they're going after folks' civil rights, whether it's their
Mhm.
participation in school sports or their ability to um, um, fully participate in civic life.
Mhm. And it's this idea of other, right? I mean, and it's just that's what it always boils down to when there's an ism, right? Whether it's racism, sexism, phobia, any phobia, it's like, this fear. And I really appreciate that you're really trying to dismantle that fear through all this work. So can you tell me a little more personally about your journey? Like, can we start out, like, tell me more about your childhood? You grew up in Indiana, and what was that like? And oh, you didn't grow up in Indiana. So tell me more
Nope.
about where
Yeah.
you're
So
from and your education and how you got where you are right now.
yeah. So tell you a little bit about what where I came from and how I wound up here in Indiana. I was born 60 years ago in suburban Chicago. Actually, I was born in Chicago on the northwest side and grew up uh, really close to O'Hare Airport under the
Or
flight path for
Schaumburg, kind of that
I
area.
was in Park Ridge.
Park Ridge,
So
yeah.
so
Okay.
I was northeast of O'Hare Airport.
Okay.
My 40th high school reunion there at Maine South was 40 or was 2 years ago. So you can do the math on that. Yeah, I grew up in a middle class family. I think it would be best to describe it. My mom was a public school middle school math teacher. My dad was a city water engineer. So both of them being um, employees who were funded by local taxes. Um, I grew up in a family that learned to value the public good and recognize the value of public education and clean and safe drinking water. Goodness knows that those two things that my parents were devoted to for their entire lives are
Wow.
things I've certainly carry with myself to this day. So I'm a public school kid. I went to in fact, I attended the same school that my mom taught at while I was in middle school, and I continued on with public school as I went to the University of Illinois for my undergraduate work, and I was there in the early '80s when you might not know that, but I like to refer to those days as sort of the golden age of synthesizers. Those were the days that synthesizers truly became sort of staple instruments within popular music.
Yeah.
Um, and as a musician myself at that time, this was something that I was really excited to explore. We knew that we were at the cusp of moving away from these very unreliable analog instruments and moving into a digital world where we were going to have computers, um, making that would help us to make music. So I started learning how to write code when I was in high school and through college, um, as well as studying music, of course. So when I attended the University of Illinois, my degrees are in music composition. But I chose to go to Illinois because they were one of 5 colleges in the United States at that time that had a really robust computer music program. And so while I was studying music theory, I was also studying how to code in Pascal and Fortran, and taking classes in calculus and statistics, because those were things I needed to learn to be able to write the kind of code I wanted to write to make the kind of music that I wanted to make.
That's so cool. As a
Um,
musician, I love this. And as a musician with limited tech understanding, I admire you so much for just sticking with that, because that's hard stuff. It's really, I've tried to code myself, and it's you got started with the basics, and that's where I got.
No,
That
I
was enough for
actually
me.
started. I actually started on my mom's Apple IIe computer, which
Hmm.
this was what she would teach with when she was a middle school math teacher, right?
Uh-huh.
And I wrote code to synthesize sound on it. And then in college, I began to, I was able to do research on the mainframe computers there, and I wrote code that wrote music, basically to simplify things.
Awesome.
um, and did some experimentation with that, did some presentations at conferences. I applied to all 5 of those schools that I mentioned a moment ago, and they were Stanford, UCSD, Illinois, where I was, Princeton, and Brooklyn College, of all places in New York. And I got accepted to all 5 of them, but
Of
Princeton
course you did. Congratulations.
Princeton gave me the best money offer. So, and it's,
Heard.
when Princeton offers you a fully funded doctoral fellowship to
Yeah.
continue your research, you don't
You say
say
yes,
no.
Princeton. You say yes,
Yes, you
Princeton.
say yes. You say yes to the fellowship, right?
Yeah.
So the crazy thing, sometimes things happen in odd ways. The day that I learned of my fellowship was actually the same day as the Challenger shuttle accident, and so
Wow.
like I often associate that amazing news with every time I see that horrible. It also brings up that thing.
Yeah.
Um, but while I was at Princeton doing my work, I started a small business called Black Squirrel Software, which is so Princeton is home to a colony of very black squirrels, which
Mhm.
is kind of unusual, at least here in the Midwest. Most of our squirrels are
Yep.
brown, although if you're in
The
Olney,
gray.
Illinois,
Yeah.
there's a colony of white squirrels there. But Princeton's black squirrels are pretty legendary. So I was actually selling some of my software. It was a pretty small business, and just an opportunity to explore that entrepreneurship angle of things. But when I was at Princeton, it was also an opportunity for me to finally start exploring myself and recognizing um, what I've been holding up inside myself. And in the 80s and the 70s, as I was growing up, we didn't really have the kind of language to be able to describe what it means to be transgender these days. Um, Although, I did find an affirming community, thankfully, in the late 80s when I was at Princeton. There was a support organization called the Renaissance Transgender Association, and that was the first time I had even heard that term, based in Philadelphia. And they still exist there and still do that work, which I'm super excited for. And to plot this in the course of history of stuff, this was the height of the AIDS crisis too. So folks who were coming out as whatever they were on the rainbow spectrum, as LGBT or T or whatever, um, this was a time where folks were very trepidatious about their expression,
Mhm,
but also a time when there was there were a lot of folks who were just throwing all caution to the wind as well.
mhm.
Um, Princeton's halfway between New York and Philadelphia, and I had um, thankfully some opportunity, and as a student to have some flexibility with expressing my gender authentically. And so after my time as a graduate student, I came back to Chicago and taught in downtown Chicago at Roosevelt University for a few years. Um,
What were the years you were there in Chicago?
in Chicago, I was
Which
there
was fun.
from like in the early 90s. So I was there from like 1990 until 96.
We just
Um,
missed each other. I graduated DePauw 98. You do the math.
okay.
I'm older than I look. And then and then and then I moved to Chicago for 5 years. So I was on the
Oh,
north,
right on.
worked at Cole Children's Museum for a long time. And
Fantastic.
I kind of know where you're from. Can I rewind you real quick?
Yeah.
Because you gave us a lot of information and I want to get to like you're talking about college and being able to come out and be yourself. When is the age you felt like I don't feel like I belong in this body? This isn't working for me. I'm in pain. When do you feel like that started? You felt that way?
4, 5.
Really? That
Yeah.
young?
Hmm.
And then can you explain to me, first of all, I want you to explain to me like how that felt and like over the years as you got older and I'm sure we're not accepted and if you tried to express it, I'd be curious to hear what happened. And then how you kind of had to channel your guts, your inner gutsy person to be who you are. So can you tell me more about that?
Um, I the ways that I acted out as a kid in um response to my own identity, which I am more secure than ever in and feel more authentic than ever in.
Beautiful.
Um, you know, it wasn't always the best way of behaving. I was a kid. I was a hormonal kid, and hormonal kids don't always do the right things.
Yeah.
I was a rebel then. I mean, I'm still a rebel now, but I know how to channel it in ways that do good.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't, when I say I did self-destructive behavior, it's basically I started smoking as a teenager, and
Yeah.
I quit in college, but I also, I picked it up again after college just because of the stress of it all.
Hmm.
Um, but I finally quit in 2001 when I started estrogen.
Well,
Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. Well, and I basically, none of the usual smoking, whatever they call cessation aids, really did it for me. It was when I realized that, starting HRT was something that when you combine that with tobacco, that's a bad
A
combination
tough combination.
for
Yeah.
your own health. So if I'm going to embrace my health in this way, I'm going to need to do it on both sides of the scale, right?
Good for you.
So I gave up tobacco for estrogen, is what I like to say. So
Okay.
my quit date is April 2001. Um, but God knows that so many people, when they saw the tragedy of 9/11, for example, and said, okay, when you see so much death around you, you realize you need to start living. Um, and that too was part of what reinforced for me, um, that I knew I was feeling like I was on the right path
So
with
really
HRT.
9/11, was that a moment for you? That I mean, it
It
was
was
a
a
moment
moment
for
for
all of
me.
us
It
and like,
wasn't the
you know,
moment. I mean, it wasn't
but it
like I snapped. I had started HRT before 9/11, so I can't say
okay.
that was,
Okay.
but I mean,
That
I
was a
mean,
wake up call of
it
like
was a
it
wake-up
could be
call
me.
at
I
the
could
same
be in my
time.
office. And I think all of us, I mean, we were like we didn't go to work that day and the streets were silent. And
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I would think in my lifetime, the only time the streets have been that quiet besides 9/11 was the early pandemic, you know? And so,
So for me, I was actually teaching that morning. I was teaching K through 8 music.
oh wow.
And my kids at that time were 4 years old.
Oh,
And no, I'm sorry, they weren't 4, they were 7. It was, they were for, yeah, they sorry, math is hard. It was 2001. They were 7 years old. They were,
Okay.
but um yeah, so they were in first grade at the time, which yeah, so we piled the twins up in the car and went home for the afternoon. But goodness knows, my teaching schedule that morning was working with really little kids, not the ones who
Mhm.
were watching the things on the television that morning. So I was actually leading junior kindergarten groups with through just singing to keep us busy
Wow.
through it
Yeah.
all, which yeah, we all do what we got to
That's what
do
you
to,
can do. That's all you
yeah,
can, and they could, there's no way they could have understood it. So you did the absolutely right thing.
we
And
have to care for one another. It's what we do.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes. So
absolutely.
so tell me more about how you cared for yourself and had the strength to kind of come out and say, this is who I am and I want to fight for other people. Like, do you feel like there was a moment, or was that, I know a lot of people, it's like it's a bunch of moments. It's like, oh, a pattern of like, wait, I've talked to one person who's struggling. I've talked to another young person who's struggling. And I talk to a lot of people. I know you do too, Veronica. And it's like, and I have a lot of family, a lot of friends, and the overall pattern I see is yes, people just struggling who can't be themselves, whether that's the nerdy self or the artistic self, the arts, or we need to champion our artists who also fall through the cracks. So what was there a pattern or a moment, and how did you kind of come to that ability to be yourself?
Well, goodness knows that, when somebody feels, when you feel like you're the only one for most of your life, and then and not suddenly, but over the course of time, you recognize that you're not the only one. Um, but honestly, I did feel that I was the only one who was experiencing all of this for much
Mhm.
of my childhood, right? Um, but as I got into college and as I was in college during some early days of the internet, I had access to a modem and networks of folks, and realized, holy crap, I'm not alone, and there are others experiencing what I'm experiencing, and there are pathways to healthy living that can be found. So I think that for me, one of those turning point moments was when I actually stepped out of my dorm room for the first
Mhm.
time as myself, and drove to Philadelphia to not be alone, um, which was pretty amazing. And to this day, I still keep in touch with some of my friends from back then, that, practically 40 years ago now. Um, that was of all things too, with with computer networks and a modem. That's how um people who were geeky like I was and I'm still geeky, but
Mhm.
at that time, that's how geeks met one another,
Right,
right?
right. And still
And
do, by the way. Yeah, still do. I met my geeky fiance via Facebook.
and I met my co-parent over a 1200 baud modem, back in 1990,
Wow.
over a computer bulletin board system. And so you were saying, I was living in Chicago from 90 until like 96. We lived actually just a couple blocks away from the Sears Tower, so we were right in the loop there.
Uh-huh.
But as they say, the rent got too damn high, and raising twins in a high-rise building,
Mhm.
um, was we recognized that wasn't a sustainable path for the kind of life we wanted to provide for our kids. So at that point, then we started looking at what other housing options were, including staying in Chicago. But we eventually settled in Northwest Indiana, in the Valparaiso Chesterton area up there in Porter County, and that's where my kids went to school. That's where I taught for a good long while, and where I lived until 2006, when I came to DePaul, to take the job here, with DePaul University. So I teach um, um, music technology, digital music production, as well as I have a full-time staff role with instructional technology. So when the pandemic hit 4 years ago, and our institution had to go full virtual, right?
Mhm.
Um, my team, my small team of 3 people, was the tip of the spear to help get our 200 faculty chalkboard and eraser professors familiar with teaching using online methods. It was quite an interesting time for
I
sure.
bet. I
Yeah.
bet. Wow. Veronica Pejril for state Senate, right?
Yep. State
Yeah,
Senate
yeah,
District
state Senate.
24.
You
So
said House, and I'm sorry, but I am blonde, and this is why I do what I do, and I haven't run for office yet. But I have to be able to keep the House and all those
so
things
so
straight.
so in Indiana, there are 100 House districts
Okay.
and 50 Senate districts. Um, my feelings are mixed on that. I know some representatives from New Hampshire, for example. The New Hampshire House of Representatives has 1,000 seats, literally
Whoa.
1,000 seats. So serving in the New Hampshire House of Representatives is your constituency is considerably smaller.
Right.
It's far more. It's nearly neighborhood based,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Um,
Wow.
so so you know, my elected role here in the city of Greencastle, my elected base, serving the third ward, meant that I represented about 2,500 people.
Mhm.
I haven't done the math with that with New Hampshire, but I can't imagine it'd be all that different.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's a great let's talk about that, what your work now and how
yep.
it has prepared you for this race, and why you think you'd be a great choice for your fellow citizens and your fellow Hoosiers.
Yeah. So many of my life experiences, I think, have prepared me for this work. Um, First and foremost, the stuff that's on my job resume, right? The fact that I am the only candidate for this office who has elected legislative experience. I have experience working across the aisle in a bipartisan way to get
Mhm.
solutions done for my community. My opponent has no such experience.
Mhm.
Um, I mentioned my sister's passing. I've been an advocate for improving recovery services throughout our area of rural Indiana and the area west of Indianapolis. We know that we have a mental health crisis in
Mhm.
Indiana as well as across the country, but how our states are responding to that mental health crisis is a reflection of our community values. Right
Absolutely.
now, how we respond to folks who are in mental health crisis, often those crises often intersect with substance use,
Mhm.
and whether someone is intentionally overdosing or using because
Medicating.
yes,
Yeah.
or
Self-medicating.
self-medicating, and a crisis call comes through. The modality of response, unfortunately, often means that their first contact is somebody with a gun,
Mhm.
which is not always the right solution for getting that person the immediate mental health care that
Absolutely.
they need. We are seeing in more areas, more states, including here in Indiana, in some communities, and not just Indianapolis. We're actually seeing it up the road in the area around Crawfordsville, up in Montgomery County, where
Mhm.
we're deploying mobile integrated health services, where a team will go to a nonviolent person in mental health crisis with um, somebody who can do the medical work for intervention,
Mhm.
understands how to administer Narcan, um, can do a full physical evaluation, medical evaluation, as well as provide access to immediate psychiatric care,
Mhm.
even if it means getting it done over a video connection on a tablet.
Mhm.
The rapidness of the response, getting it done in a way that actually takes the load off of our valued law enforcement
Right.
officers, um, who have other things to do than to sit in an emergency room waiting for a mental health professional to meet with them
Yeah.
while at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that person's not on staff at the time, and they're farming somebody in from 2 counties over. This is
Hmm.
not an uncommon circumstance across our state. And so part of my solution for improving that situation, one is expanding resources for those mobile integrated health teams, but also, if we provide the funding for these services, that's only part of the equation. We need people who can actually take these jobs. We
Hmm.
need more mental health care professionals. And what work are we doing to incentivize young folks considering new careers to enter that field in that profession, right? There are some scholarships available that are incentivizing this. I think we can do better. Just as we certainly need to do better in Indiana with respect to teacher recruitment, we need to do far
Preach,
better.
preach, preach.
We need to do far better on recruiting mental health care professionals as
Hmm.
well. And yeah,
Okay.
don't get me too started on the teacher recruitment thing, but when we start moving the goalposts here in Indiana to allow folks who are uncredentialed,
Hmm.
because we can't find enough school qualified licensed school counselors, that we are trying to pass laws that will bring in unlicensed, uncredentialed clergy to serve as proxy counselors in our public schools. This seems to be a big red
What?
flag.
You
Yeah.
just blew my mind. I had not, who thought of this, and where is it right now? Where is
Um,
this plot?
this bill did not pass through
Okay.
the legislature this year. You
Okay.
may see it again next year. But
Yeah. On behalf of
yes,
people who have been deeply damaged by religion and grew up in a religious cult, and grew up with a lot of fear, I would request that this bill never be passed. Let's just put
what
that out
yeah,
there. I mean, and that's no offense to people who in the, I mean, I have family again who are religious. I'm sure you do too.
I'm a
But
person of faith myself.
separation of church and state. It's written in our constitution. Some people a long time ago, way before us, thought, hey, this is a good idea. Every generation has upheld separation of church and state. So, yeah, it's
I was raised Catholic, and
okay.
it took me a good long while to come back to my faith.
Hmm.
But when I did come back to my Christian faith, I came by way of our local Methodist church,
Okay.
by the circumstance that I began playing piano there, in the summers about 15 years ago.
Huh.
I also have a steady church gig in Indianapolis too, but my faith home here is here in Greencastle with my United Methodist community.
So you're a person of faith
Yeah,
saying this doesn't need to be in our schools though, because it's very
absolutely
difficult.
not.
And I think I think it would be possible, and I do know lovely, lovely rabbis and ministers, and I just don't think, I think it's very hard for one faith to serve an entire school. So thank you for alerting me of that. There's always these things that happen in Indiana where I go, what?
Hmm.
All over though, by the way. And I do want to share a couple things to respond to what you said. So spending a little more time in Oregon with my fiance, there actually are a lot of this street force that you're talking about, where it's as I believe when I see them, they're unarmed officers, right? But they still are police officers, but they're unarmed. I deeply feel we have to get the guns off the cops, and that's the only way to the future. It's the only peaceful way to a peaceful future, because you can't ask citizens to put down their guns if the government doesn't put down their guns first. At least start it. You know what I mean? So I feel very strongly about that. I've lost a cousin and many classmates to death by gun, suicide by gun. And so I'm deeply that's one of my areas too, which that's one I don't know if we overlap in, but I personally, I don't want to speak for you, I personally would just get rid of all the guns and turn them all into art, which is happening, by the way. There are gun buyback programs. I would like to tell you, you're aware of this. And then in some cities, they've turned them into really cool sculptures. I don't know if you've seen that. So I would love that to happen. Bloomington, Indiana. I may or may not have written the police department there and suggested it when I was really active with the art scene there. The other thing is that there are some great scholarships now, and NYU and a bunch of NYU started this several years ago, giving away a full ride to anybody going to medical school. If you get accepted into their medical school, it's a full ride. So it's something I'm passing on that I've maybe considered because I have a master's. Why not go for a PhD? Because I'm crazy, right? But anyway, it's a good program for people who are looking to go, but we do need more people in education and service. And what's also interesting is that you have this family of service. And that's one thing that makes me really feel like I feel you and I get you. I think that's my mom was an EMT, my dad was a construction worker, and we have a lot of cops and nurses in my family, teachers, professors. And it's really interesting. I think that kind of, I've been thinking about that, and you kind of proved my theory, maybe, that there are these families of service. And I'm just so glad that you're there to be of service for Greencastle. You are serving Greencastle, and you're ready to serve the state of Indiana. We just have a few minutes left. So I want to ask you one more question, and then if there's anything else you want to share.
Mhm.
Who's the gutsiest person you've ever met? The gutsiest person who's been the gutsiest people, your role models in this life?
I've been blessed to, because of some of the stink that I've made in this state. I've had the opportunity to go places and do some things and meet some pretty amazing people. Um, so there's a pretty long. I'm not here to name drop, some of the folks that I've met, but
Oh, go ahead.
particularly,
Go ahead.
um, I was blessed to meet Mayor Pete a few years ago, but
Aw.
for the one person who I really thought, particularly relevant to our conversation today, who's doing work in a legislature, um, who I think is the gutsiest person I've met recently, is Montana Representative Zoe Zephyr, who stood up to her state legislature. And of course, you may know that she was, um, whatever they call it, legally chastised for doing so, and banished from the room for a certain amount of time. Um, but she continues to represent her community. Um, uh, and she impresses me to no end when people of honor stand up to dishonorable folks in power.
Mhm.
That is
Ah,
that's what I call gutsy, and Zoe Zephyr is the person I think of when that comes to mind.
I love it when people of honor stand up to people, dishonorable people, right? Is that how you said it? That's
Dishonorable people in
yeah.
power, yeah.
And power, dishonorable. Yeah. Thank you. And we need that now more than ever, which you and I could probably talk for a day and a half about the state of national politics. But we want to talk about the state of Indiana, and we want the people of Indiana to keep talking, right? And
Mhm.
to learn more, because I've had such a lovely time talking to you, and I've learned. I hope other people have learned who you are, and we can see you at your home, the things you value, school, nation, weaving, exercising, cats. So
That's
so
Pumpkin there up on the
I
tree.
love it. So, I mean, I just really wish you all the best. And I think, it's hard for any woman running for office. It's going to be hard for anyone in the LGBTQ plus community running, and it shouldn't be. We should be looking at what you believe in. And I hope we did that today. And I really want to thank you, Veronica. Is there anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
If I were to close, I guess I'm thinking about, like, maybe what advice I might give to folks who are watching this, and
Yeah.
other women and other marginalized folks who are coming into their own and thinking about, what their next gutsy move might be.
Hmm.
Um, You know, it's okay to play the long game, but you've got to stay in your game. Don't don't
Mhm.
don't put your cards down on the table and walk away. You got to stay in your game, even if it means playing the long game.
Ah, Veronica, you are talking to me. I've been there, and I think we all, anybody who works in these, and I have a lot of friends who are in political offices, and I have seen the work they did to get elected. I see the work that they do to stay in that position and serve their fellow citizens. It is hard work, and sometimes you want to give up. And trust me, I've seen it in people. I've seen it when they lose a race. I've seen it when they win a race. I've seen it halfway through through their tenure, and they always keep going. So thank you for that. That's a beautiful way to end this. And thank you, Veronica Pejril, gutsy person who's running for Indiana Senate District 24, right?
You got it.
So
Thanks.
thank
So,
you so much.
and last thing, if folks are interested in supporting the campaign or volunteering, you can go to veronica4indiana.com. That's the word "for" spelled out. So veronica4indiana.com,
Perfect.
to learn more about the campaign.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much. And if you don't mind sticking around, let's chat a little bit after this. Okay.
very
Thank
good.
you, Veronica. Have a great day. Thank you
You
for
too.
joining us, folks.
Bye bye.
Bye.